And speaking of good forage base, Bill, I'd ask you, I understand you've started your operation relatively recently, but you've decided to base it and focus it around forage production. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, the reason why we did that, I mean, we started 3 years ago with this operation. It was basically a renovation startup approach to cow-calf in southern Tennessee. And the approach that we pursued was because it allowed us to have a broader scope of variables that we could manage, if done correctly, could enhance profitability.
Let's take a closer look at Bill Topper's farm in Tennessee as Brian Baxter reports.
For cow-calf producers, maintaining their forage base and the condition of their cows is essential to keeping their herd productive. But every operation faces different challenges. For example, Bill Topper has been around agriculture most of his life, but his 800-acre farm in Middle Tennessee is a place he and his wife just bought a couple of years ago.
The pastures, when we drove through the place with the realtor, and he drove us around on a four-wheeler, and I can tell you that the weeds were so high that there were often times where we would drive across the field with the four-wheeler, you couldn't see where you're going. And you know, you really had to literally, pardon the pun, see through the weeds to be able to envision what it could be, you know, as a really good place to raise cattle. But now we're in the process as a full-blown cattle operation. It's taken us about 2 years to get to where we are today.
Weeds are a battle nearly all producers face when trying to improve or simply maintain their forage resources so they meet their herd's nutritional needs. Bill Topper started by identifying his biggest weed problem, which in this part of the country was buckbrush.
That was a weed that we had to address first. And and how we attacked that weed was with a product called Chaparral. We knew we wouldn't get it on one pass because the problem was that bad, but we've sprayed every inch of this ranch now with that product to wipe out the buckbrush. And the second pass, we've really cleared up, I think, at least 95% of that particular stemmy-based weed. You know, we were in some pastures this morning that you'd be hard-pressed to find a weed. You can find one maybe every 100 yards or so, but we're at the point this year with a pasture like that we may not have to go in and spray this year. So we get a year off from spraying, and we can go concentrate on fields that the weed control isn't quite as good.
Dow AgroScience's specialized field team works closely with cattle producers like Bill to identify weeds, review product options, and recommend pasture improvement programs that build forage quality over time.
Prescription is the key word here. It's not going out and doing the shotgun effect where you just go out there and say, I've got weeds, you pull the trigger on whatever herbicide is the cheapest, and then you've got weeds again, you know, that year later on or the next year. Prescribing is key because yes, cattle prices are high, but that doesn't mean we need to be foolish with our money. Let's be wise with our money so we can put more money back in our pockets.
When you drive by our place, you know, we want people to look at our cattle and, you know, basically say, oh, there's some nice cattle. And when they drive by our pastures and they look at those, they say, those are some of the nicest pastures we've ever seen. You know, it's not overgrazed. It's well taken care of. You know, we can't find a weed on the place. I mean, that's really the dream.
Bill, that's a great video and more importantly, a fantastic story. Tell us more about what you've done to optimize forage production in your operation.
Well, I mean, as the videotape, you know, portrayed, it's been weed control, you know, ultimately it was number one for us for beginning. And now it's increasing the seed volume that we have of the grasses and legumes to enhance the pH level in our acreage without adding fertilizers and that sort of thing. But weed control will always be predominant for us. I mean, we have to have volumes of forage. And then it's working on the protein level that those volumes inhibit. That's critical for us.
Tell us more about some of the challenges that you've faced as you've tried to rebuild this operation.
Well, you know, Mother Nature's number one. I mean, we obviously don't have any control over that. So what we have to take into consideration are the temperatures and the amount of precipitation that we get. You know, so our conservation program is really centered around managing those variables best we can. We try to contain our water rather than let it just run off the place into the nearby creek. That's number one. And number two is we just, again, keep increasing forage on every acreage that's available on the farm. And then we have to consider north-facing hills, south-facing hills. Different situations require a different recipe, when it comes to different weeds that we have to treat or different seeds that will grow in those environments.
Sims, let's head south to Texas. I know the cattle operation is critically important, but you also run a big hunting business as well. Tell us how you manage grazing for both your livestock as well as your wildlife.
We're in a rotational grazing system with being one herd, and we rotate those livestock around in a pasture at one time. By doing this allows the pastures to grow and recover and benefit from the cattle and sheep moving through. When they do this, then the deer and the turkey and the quail are allowed to be left with cover, and they can stay in these pastures instead of having to move away from the livestock. One of the things we have to do is to make sure that we have water available in all the pastures at all times, regardless of where the livestock are, so that they can stay at home.
What would you consider some of the key best practices that you've used to optimize production and grazing for all these livestock?
Again, rotational grazing is the key factor to our operation. Without it, it'd be hard to find the balance between them. Our brush management is another key aspect. We have to make sure that the rancher in us doesn't take and clear out all of the land and not leave any cover for the wildlife. So we have to remind ourselves that we're also in the wildlife business a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. And you guys have been doing this for what, 5 generations? Is that
yes,
right?
Sir. Yes, sir.
That's outstanding. Well, we're going to have much more discussion about the best practices in pasture and rangeland management. But if you'd like more information about improving your forage, Dow AgriSciences, or any of our discussion topics today, you can always visit the website rangeandpasture.com.